Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Political No Brainer podcast where we move past winner takes all politics and into real conversation. We're bringing in real guests from all over. Today, we have the privilege, the honor of speaking with John Gallagher, a priest with the Catholic Church for over 25 years. And his story was incredible to me. We talked, we met at Million Cups of Coffee, we just talked. And his story was just incredible to me. And I wanted him to share his story. And I'm going to jump in here and there and ask some questions. We talked and we talked a lot. And he sent me some information about important things that are going on. But John, most important is your story. I want to know exactly what's on your mind. So,
Thank you for having me. This is a pleasure. It's been sometimes since I've actually talked on the story. What I can really say is for over 25 years, I was in active ministry in Northern Ireland and here in Palm Beach Diocese here in Florida. And I had worked in the Northern Ireland Troubles in the second theater of the Troubles. I was there when the first ceasefire happened in 1996, and for those viewers who would be familiar with Sunday Bloody Sunday by U2, that was my parish. So
wow.
bomb shootings and terror was something was just routine. It was something in my life. I grew up with that through those dark days of the troubles that many people in the world see on their 6 o'clock news televisions for all the years. I came to the States in 2000 to a place called Fort Pierce by the Diocese of Palm Beach at the request of the then bishop. And it was basically just for the experience of working here transatlantic. But what became very evident as I stayed here in the States was my first parish in Palm Beach in a place called Fort Pierce. That the rumblings of sexual impropriety was happening. And coming from Northern Ireland, I wasn't terribly familiar with that because we had the other thing of terror, shootings, bombings, and killings. That was our main diet. So like a peaceful world of in the sense of parish with mass, confessions, and funerals. We had that always colored in with shootings and bombings. This was a little different. It was sunshine here in Florida, but behind the closed doors, there was different conversations and different experiences happening that for a young man coming in, this was different. And it was presented differently that, you weren't cool. That was sort of the word that was used. You're not really one of us. It's not cool. And there's a lot of impropriety. It was very difficult to pin because it was so much outside of my wheelhouse. I wasn't terribly familiar with that. But the priest, who has subsequently since died, he was the father of two kids he had adopted. He had a drug addiction. But when he spoke, he had the voice of Jeremy Irons, the movie actor. So every time I hear Jeremy Irons, I think of this guy. But he was completely bigoted. He grew up in England, so he had that English-Irish bigotry, and it was preconceived. So he worked from that prejudice going forward, and everything was double entendre. It was innuendo. And really, that was sort of my flavor of life, wasn't my conversation. So the innuendos at the time I didn't understand. I know what they are now. They are part of the grooming technique of narcissists. And he was a narcissist, but he was also a predator. And he was basically trying to figure out by this coded language where I was on that spectrum. And if I was going to take the bait and give full disclosure. Fortunately for me, I was completely ignorant of what he was doing. I've learned all of this since afterwards. And so I really, one, I didn't register, one, I didn't answer because I really didn't know what he was looking for. I just thought the guy was crazy and I just told him he needed to get medical help. And he thought this was entertaining, but in reality, he had a different agenda. And the agenda would become evident as he and I would continue to work together of his personal proclivities, his very colorful and decadent past would emerge, and his addictions. and this really sort of came together at one particular time, that became my job instantly to clean up. I didn't know what I was cleaning up, what had happened. And that sort of became the trajectory of going forward of what life would become like as a Catholic priest living in a rectory here in the United States. Initially, I thought it was just pertaining to me in the area I was in. But in hindsight, and subsequently now, I know that this is more the norm than the exception.
So now, when and you're talking about Florida and you're talking about the United States, but this is a problem that it has since been uncovered that it's happening all over the world as far as,
Yeah.
and this is something I sort of brought to your attention that I think the whole notion of sexual abuse and human trafficking is almost like it gets uncovered piece by piece by piece. So for the longest time it was the Catholic Church, which was really the first epiphany we all had to what was going on. But then there's been, the Boy Scouts. There's been the Sandusky, the Coach Sandusky, which by no means do I believe was an anomaly. I don't know of any other stories. There's also um, there's all sorts of stories and all sorts of groups that have been. And one of the things we discussed is in the Catholic Church, especially, there was a big discussion about retribution, about compensation, and compensation really isn't the solution. Within the Catholic Church, the compensation didn't always come to fruition because a lot of archdioceses filed bankruptcy and evaded payments. But how the idea that how do we get to the bottom of this and mitigate some of this problem? Is there any hope of that where we minimize some of this that's going on?
Well, that's a great question. And it's a question that does not have an answer. And the answer people are looking for, that answer is not available. As in compensation, as monetary, that typically does not come. What actually happens in reality, and what has become very evident, is there is an actual playbook that comes into play when a victim comes forward and says that they have had an inappropriate relationship or experience or an altercation with a said priest. So typically what comes into play is that the perpetrator is protected. He is typically either removed or kept quiet, and a wall of protection or hedge of protection is placed around him. But we'll leave that there because that's a whole another series of conversations. Then the victim is re-victimized and shamed. They're told that they're not recalling the thing appropriately, that it was misunderstood, that was did not happen. So this whole conversation then takes on a whole new dynamic. The dynamic then is to re-victimize the victim, get them to self-question, self-doubt. It gets them to a place of they are completely re-traumatized. In that re-traumatization, they then become even more isolated because many of them are adults. And depending on what age they are in the adults, some will get it in their 20s, some will carry it through their teenage years, depending on when the abuse will happen. Some will get it in their 40s, 50s, some even get it later, and that's gone into the whole conversation of repressed memory. And there's a whole science and series of studies done on repressed memories that come to light. And a lot of them will remember things that will happen and that did happen in their childhood. But what happens is that the trauma is so horrific, the abuse is so vile, and it's so demonic that many will basically block this out of their mind. Because usually the abuse will have happened by a trusted member of the clergy who has become a friend, who has completely grim mum and dad, who sits in their home, who's having dinner with them, most likely gone on vacation with them, stayed over, a whole milieu of things that could have happened. And mum or dad will say, you can't say that about the priest. So the kid is completely victimized. Now, when they get the courage and the strength and the power to come forward, that something has triggered that, an event, a time, health, whatever it is, it could be a whole series of events, and they go to speak to someone, and there's a deception. The church is executed a complete deception Because the initial deception when the late Pope Francis came in was there's going to be full transparency, full disclosure. We're setting up the protection of child minors onto the direction of their former Bishop of Boston, Cardinal O'Malley. That was a complete deception. People thought, okay, great, we're going to get answers. That was a complete hologram, a complete smoke and mirrors. People were coming forward, they were telling their story, and they were being re-victimized. They got nothing. They walked away. They were shamed and re-shamed. And they said, that's not how it happened. And they're looking to come to a bishop for vindication, for compassion. He is the shepherd. And typically what happens, they're weaponized. Attorneys get involved, the legal team gets involved, and all the other levels of the bureaucracy of the church, even before they ever get to the bishop, if they get there. And then when they get there, they're shamed, demonized, and hurt. And they walk out. And this is a long game. The church's game is to re-victimize them, shame them, and hurt them. Not to give them justice, not to give them vindication, because they're protecting the machine. And if you look at all the different systems within the Catholic Church, they'll say, we're resolving the situation. The one thing that is guaranteed, they have a geographical solution. And the geographical solution is they will take that priest out and they will move him. And in cases, they will put him on a plane and send him to some other part of the world. That is documented and proof is there. And the victim is left with the pieces. And typically the family is either has said no to them, has ignored them, has shamed them, said you're crazy, no one believes you. And they spent most of their life not being believed. And no amount of money will ever fix that. They're looking for justice and for someone to hear them.
So to unpack a couple of things now, just like you said, when a priest becomes a friend of a family, to the point where he's over for dinner, you're vacationing with him. It's almost like, I guess this may be the wrong term, but a pedigree of a friend. You're a friend with a priest. Your family prides themselves in that friendship. So when the child brings to the parents' attention that there's this problem, the first thing the parents do is they don't even believe it, which is the biggest problem of all. So that's
Well, there's certain words, there's certain behaviors, there's certain things that have happened. Typically, when a priest will come in, there is a way that they will groom and pick their category. And they will identify the child that they have an interest in. They'll pick the child before the family. Then they'll check out the family. Will the family be wealthy? Will they have access to that? Or in some cases, in the case I identified with, it was uh, a broken family. They had family issues. And what happens then is that if a mom is not really accepted or veneered as, oh, they've had their challenges, things are going wrong there. And he starts to show affection to their child. He said, hey, mom. Then all of a sudden she gets a pedigree, she gets a status. The same can be said for a couple. Oh, we've got status. Or, and regardless of where they are in the economic, then as they're working on that child, he's been nice to our kids. He may take them swimming, he may have them in a choir, he may have them in sports, whatever, maybe on the altar. It's case of act. Where is the first touch point of access? That's always the question. What was the first point of access? And there, that builds the confidence. You're building the confidence until come over for lunch, come over for dinner, come over for the holidays. Go and be nice to father. And the father will say key words. Would a priest ever tell a lie? That's usually a trigger word. When I hear that word, there's a problem coming, or there's a problem there. I would never say that. You can come, and there's certain ways that they will go and they will groom and they will position themselves within the family.
and there's
And
no
then,
go ahead.
and then that's where the trouble starts.
And there's no reason to believe that it has to be a broken home. Just like you said, it could be an affluent home. However, they decide to work their
And it's
avenue.
correct. And it's all about the child. So once they pick their star child, and there's always a favorite. And you see that even in just in regular families where there's abuse, where, and most recently we've heard all these cases whereby one child has been locked in a cupboard or is not allowed any food and the rest are all fed. That's the one that's the special one who gets the special treatment. There's one who is the prize and they are the sacrifice. They are it. And they're the access to the ultimate. And it's the seduction to mom and dad. It's pure seduction. It's
That,
gaining and stealing their confidence.
and that child, if I'm honest, there's an attraction. Is what first brings that priest's attention to that child. There's
Correct.
just like when you want to date somebody, just on a normal level, when you ask somebody to a movie on a normal basis, it's that attraction.
The pedophiles that I have met and I have lived with, when they were caught, one of the questions I have asked them, why a child? Why not an adult? And they have no attraction to an adult. A child is a sexual trigger, a sexual turn on for them. It seems weird and strange, and it is all of the above to any right-minded thinking person because it is twisted. It's perversion. And when this abuse happens, usually the family are present. You're typically always in the home, but he will be able to seclude that child to do whatever he needs to do. Whether that be to take him into sports, take him camping, doing some special thing, special treat for them. And then it's always our special secret. You can't tell anyone. This is between us. And even if they did tell mom and dad, and
The,
the research has shown mom and dad don't believe them.
So is there any way to bring to parents' attention, just even whether it's via podcast or just in school, that if they're saying this, there's real good reason to take heed. There's real good reason to take into consideration what they're saying.
Well,
Like the
I
law of
had a
averages is the law of averages there, that if a child is bringing this to your attention, it's fairly accurate.
the challenge you're facing, and I've seen this up front. I was a number of years back, I was in a school for some other business. And in the course of conversation, one of the teachers was making fun of that they had asked the kids in school to draw pictures of things at home that were important to them. An innocuous question. So they were looking through all the pictures and some, the pictures were all beautiful, sunflowers, happy mum and dad, and every various forms of artistic accomplishment. But there was one, and it was a kid had drawn his with just a black biro pen, matchsticks. And I looked at it, and everyone was laughing, thinking this was funny that this kid was incompetent, unable to use color, and this is what they shown. And I looked at the picture and I said, "Do you understand what this is?" And they were all laughing, thinking it's funny. I said, "Your kid is just drawing you a picture of a soft porn scene in their home." It was a conversation stopper, and I walked them through it. I said, "Now you've got a problem, and you have to fix it. You better get DCF in here to talk to that child. That child is giving a cry for help." I said, "How long has this been happening?" The kid had been doing it for about 2 weeks. I said, "The shame is on you." Teachers are not alert. Teachers are incompetent when it comes to that unless they're particularly trained. And they're not being trained. Because one of the largest industries here in the United States and one of the largest exports is the availability of porn. Many people, many adults are so sanitized and desensitized to porn. They don't see it. They see it as normal. So when a kid will come in and saying that, if the teacher thinks this is normal because of their own personal proclivities, that child doesn't have a chance.
So now, this is really important, and there's a chance. that we could train teach. It's like you said, there's a lack of training. So recently, I was on an airplane, and they're starting to train airline stewards about human trafficking. They're starting to
Correct.
train airline stewards about spotting. And so it's an important step because and it's an important cutoff. If those airline stewards are trained to at least sense a problem and then bring it to somebody that's better at identifying the problem if there is a problem, have we ever gotten to the point where we ever discussed with school boards or school administrators about getting our teachers this training about at least not necessarily intervening immediately when the thought comes up from minimal training, but at least getting somebody more trained involved. They have the minimal training, and I don't know why it necessarily has to be minimal, but for the sake of this conversation, they have minimal. They have some training. They sense a problem. They sense it, and they now understand they need to bring somebody in that's really experienced, like
Well,
yourself. Which is another point I'm going to bring about how you work with law enforcement.
so here's the question, and you can answer this in a different way. Every other week in either newsprint, podcast, there's always talks about child bullying. And schools have spent a fortune on prevention of bullying. It didn't go away. And in some cases, teachers have encouraged it. In some cases, when things have been reported, it has never gone up the chain. For over 30 odd years in my life as a priest, I worked in faith-based schools in elementary all the way through to university. And I used to say to teachers, when a kid gives you an alert or gives you something that causes for concern or for flag, you have to realize they're communicating because in home they're not able to communicate. So school would be the playground for all the emotional challenges that they're facing. You need to be sensitive. And the challenges they're facing is a lot of teachers are not sensitive. They don't have the wherewithal, or most realistically, they don't want to do it. They don't want to get involved. They don't want to be involved. So they'll turn the other way. And that's in any genre. I know many priests who have told me they would never do what I have done. I know teachers who would tell me they will never report.
But if
And
we were to
that's a challenge as a cultural thing.
right, and it is a huge challenge with a lot of return on investment if somehow we got the point across that it shouldn't feel so awkward, that it is the right thing to do, and even if you get it wrong, because there's a chance you're going to get it wrong, it's okay to get it wrong. It's better to get it wrong than it is just to not do it. It's
Well,
okay.
here's the thing, and we'll use this as the litmus test. A number of years ago in the Irish Independent, there was a priest who was arrested, who was sentenced to jail for pedophilia. When asked by the judge after sentencing, how did he know what to do? He had just come out of seminary. He was just fairly new to ministry. He'd been in his early 20s. This is in the 90s. The priest had a phenomenal, fantastic answer. He said, Your Honor, when I did the training for the protection of minors, sponsored and prepared for by the church, that was the manual I needed to gain access to trust and to sexually abuse children. That didn't go away. The ones who will show up usually for the training are the ones who will have an interest. They'll pay attention because the training that exists at the moment in the Catholic Church, it is how to gain access. It's the manual on how to become a pedophile. And that's what we need to be very, very careful of. What is presented as the solution and the panacea oftentimes is a manual for those who have any discrepancy and how to gain access, how to buy the trust, what to watch for. Because you're dealing with people who are seductive. There needs to be a complete conversation change and a cultural shift in regards to the whole idea of sexual impropriety. We have sexualized and created, we've objectified kids in a very wrong way in our media and our television. We see that in reality TV shows, the little pageants, all of that. That has taken away kids' innocence. We do it even through our games. So we're not talking with like. The conversation really needs to get a base point where everyone agrees this is where we're starting from. And everyone is not agreeing to start from the same place. Because pedophilia is not going away. It's here. Whether it be in the church, whether it be in organizations, or in the political realm. But
No,
what needs to happen is that if someone brings it forward, that they are not shamed or destroyed. The whistleblower is the person who needs to be protected. Because what happens when someone speaks out? They're traumatized, victimized, shamed, and destroyed, whether it be in the church or in the secular world. The cultural shift and being able to speak truth and allow organizations to take an evaluation of where they are in regards, okay, if someone speaks to us about something that's happening, we need to pay attention. We see that even in the workplace when someone reports sexual harassment and they go to HR. HR is not their friend. That's their enemy. That takes the whistleblower. We have a problem. Get rid of that person. So this is a universalism, whether it be in sexual impropriety with minors or with adults. The cultural of our nation, of our universe has to change.
but where can we start? So here's the thing, and there's a lot to unpack there. So let me take it from the top. But first of all, if we create a program that enables people to understand there's a problem, we're also creating a new sense of information for pedophiles, which is a big problem. We're literally trying to do something good, and we're winding up with something significantly worse. That's a
Correct.
big problem. Then the other problem is just the fact that it's human nature, like you said, that the pedophilia and the sexual trafficking is human nature, but so many people are affected by it, and that's my whole hope, is to understand how we can minimize it, somehow reduce it even by 10%, because I understand the problem comes to light. One organization at a time, one way or another, it comes to light, but we've never really gotten to a solution to how we can really address the problem. And like you said, in the workplace, then it's in the workplace. It's a problem. And how do we create a better environment overall, I guess, is the question.
Well, I think that, I mean, there's a whole lot of things that can be said or not said, but I think the reality is that a lot of people out there have no interest. They have no interest until it lands at their back door. Doesn't, there's no interest to them.
That's just sad, because I would love to see solutions, and I think a part of it's in our education system. Solutions, like I said, in the in the airline industry, we're teaching airline stewards how to sense a problem, and of course, the stewards aren't going to become human traffickers from the training they're getting. The issue is now in our school system, when we give them a certain amount of training, we may be cultivating new pedophiles, which is a real concern, which I never realized was a concern before. Then in your but moving on to, you are bringing a case, which is, first of all, there's two things you've done that have really interested me. One, you stopped a pedophile in the church, a priest, from being transferred to another parish. I mean, that's an incredible story. So I'd like to get into that, about how you literally got involved with law enforcement. The church was about to basically airlift them to another, as they do, bounce them around, but you got involved in this one particular case. So let's start there. Can you tell us about that one particular case?
Well, I was the priest at Holy Name in West Palm Beach, and I had 9 masses on a Sunday. And I got there and I didn't have any assistance. And when I was appointed by the diocese, I said, will I be getting help? They said, no, you're on your own. To which my response was, I'm being set up for failure. And there was no response. There was perfect silence. I said, your silence answers that. Long story short, I, I'm given a priest, and he was coming from India. And I was a little suspect because he was coming via Libya, which was unusual. Put it like that, you know. And he came, and when I picked him up at the airport, he just came in on the 13th or 12th or 13th of December, just in time for Christmas. And he came in just with one suitcase. This guy was here now for a couple of years. But I had an instant dislike to the guy. I just said, there's something about this guy I don't care for. I didn't know what it was, but I really didn't have time to process and digest. We were in the Christmas, there was a Christmas. I was running a parish with all the Christmas, pre-Christmas festivities and celebrations and rituals all going through to get to Christmas. And I was a one man. And I was getting a new guy coming in. And literally all I needed was he can speak English and he can say mass. That was taking off a heavy load in my world. And when he came in, he was sort of he was different. You know, I had worked with Indian priests before, and this guy was sorry, and they were phenomenal guys. This guy was different. He just sort of had a different swagger. And Christmas came and went. He was unable to drive, and he hadn't complete. I've been told by the diocese he didn't need to do the protection for child protection classes until January. So I figured, well, he can't get up. He's just not driving. He's not out and about. He's on call for me in the church, what I need. And that was it. So the first Sunday in January, I think it was the 5th of January, which in the calendar would have been the Epiphany Sunday. It was the first Sunday in months I did not have an evening mass. And I was, wow, I've worked all Sunday and this is great. I can decompress, catch a breath. That was a short-lived exhale. Mass had just ended at about 6:30. And I get a phone call. And my music minister said, we have a problem. Nothing else. And I said, okay, what's the problem? Have you seen Father Jose? I went, no, Mass is not, she said, it's over. So you better talk to him. We have a problem. As I'm ending the call, I see him go into his room, very disturbed and very upset. So, okay, not really knowing the guy. I was trying to, okay, how do I approach this delicately? What did he do? And so I said, Jose, a question for you. How was the Mass this evening? What were the people like? And I knew he was very flustered. And I said, did anything happen? No, no, no. I said, are you sure? And he paused and he went, something happened. I went, okay. I said, I'll tell you what, go into your room, stay there until I call you. I called my office manager, and her husband answered the phone. He was a retired detective. I said, you and Barbara better come to the rectory. I have a problem, and I need a witness. I didn't know what I needed a witness to at this stage. I didn't know what was going to unpack. In the interim, I discovered that it was a 14-year-old boy, and the police had been notified. So this guy was coming into me, and I brought him into the living room. And I said, Jose, can you tell me what happened tonight? And response was, Father, I need to go to confession. I said, I'm not hearing your confession till you tell me what happened. He said, something bad. I said, what happened? And what subsequently happened was, as the evening mass ended and the final song ended, he got to the front entrance Still in full vestments, he took out his phone and asked this, show this kid images of young boys. This was caught on camera. He now is telling me full disclosure, full confession of what happened. So I said to him, how many? He said about 200. What I didn't know until shortly afterwards, when I was explaining to me about the police, each one of those images of a minor is 5 years. And he had over 200 or whatever on them. So I said, okay, what ages are these guys? He says, young boys, teenage boys. I said, clothes? There are no clothes. He says, naked. I went, okay. I said, frontal or rear? Frontal. I said, erect or flaccid? Erect. And I'm going, oh, okay, where's this conversation going to go? And he kept saying, I need to go to confession. I said, no, you don't. You're going to jail. In the meantime, we had contacted the sheriff's office and the state attorney's office. And we were sort of waiting on direction of what next steps were. And they gave me a series of questions I needed to ask. So I'm down this rabbit hole conversation at this stage. And as we were going further, I was going, I can't believe this. So I took a breath and I went for a walk around the living room and I played the piano. So I sat at the piano and I went, whatever happens next, I have to find priesthood. It'll never be the same. And I came back and I said, okay, tell me, did this happen in India? He says, yes, all the time. I says, wait, he said, all the time. My superiors know. They would tell me, go to confession, say my prayers, and don't do it again. And then they put me on a new assignment. He said, well, why are we in Libya? He said, it happened in Libya. I had subsequently discovered that in my research in Libya. I went, okay. I said, so tell me, I said, do you operate alone? No, I'm part of a group. Now I was getting to the point of, ooh, what did I uncover here? And he was telling this as matter of fact. He was, like a canary, he was singing. He couldn't get this like fast enough. And I was, hold on here. So I asked him a more question. I said, so tell me about these groups. He said, I'm part of a group. I like to watch and I like to participate. I said, what age are these kids? I said, 16, 18. He said, no, younger. I said, 14, 16. He went, no. I said, 12, 14. He went, no. I went, 10, 12. He said, no. I said, 8, 10. He went, younger. I said, Jose, how younger am I going? He said, very young. I went, 2 to 4? He said, no, younger. And I paused and I went, if I ask this next question, I don't know if I will like the answer. I said, how young is young? He said, babies. And at that point, I didn't know where to go. He proceeded to tell me he was part of an underground network. He was part of a group and that his superiors all knew about it. And this was normal in his world. And he was upset that I was upset. I said, I'm not upset at you. I'm upset at what you were doing and that people allow this to pertain. I said, what you've done is just evil. He says, I can get on a plane and go. I said, you're not going anywhere. You're going to jail. Jeff, this started at about 8 o'clock at night. We were still in this conversation at 3 o'clock in the morning. And at 3:30, I said, you better go to your bed. The sheriff's officer told me, keep him there. So next morning he went to his bed. He went up. I didn't sleep. I documented everything. I knew the sheriff would be coming in the morning, as they told me that. And when I got up the next morning, I said, what do I do now? But I knew I needed to get into his room. So I said to him, you can say the morning mass. I didn't want that, but I had no other option to gain access. And he went into his room and I came out into his room. I picked up, he told me he had no computer, bar the one he'd been given by the church. He had multiple computers, multiple electronic devices, and I looked at his passport. I said, he's not going to escape on me. And I cleared everything out. He came back in and I said, you stay in that room. In the interim, I'm talking with the sheriff's office, what's happening next. The sheriff says, okay, well, someone will be over. And this detective came in and she was like a battle axe. That's the only way I can describe it. And I told her that ever since. She came in like a stormtrooper and she sat down and basically barked orders at me. And I didn't know where this was coming from. I don't know nothing about it. I'm from Northern Ireland, so cops were just never in my quality world. And she had all these questions, and I turned around and I said, maybe this will help. And I handed her a whole timeline. And I had one of those banker boxes. And I said, in here are all his computers, his passport, his documentation, his visa, everything you want on this guy is here. She sat back in the chair. She says, where the heck, and a few other words in between, did you come from? I've never had this. She says, last week I went to arrest a priest and he was gone. This is a first. And I said, well, just where is he now? I said, he's upstairs in his room. And what do you tell him? I said, he can't leave. Is that all you told him? I said, no, I told him if he leaves, I'll kill him. She said, and John, I believe you. So I said, he's not going anywhere. So she said, I'm going to come back to arrest him. She told me at the time. And I said, I just have one favor. He'll be here. This is for me. And I said, give me a 30 minutes heads up. I need a witness. She's okay. Done. She came back that night. I had my witnesses there. And he came down and he said, Father, make this go away. I said, I will. So she arrested him. And he said, Father, come get me. I said, what? He says, come get me. That's what always happens. I said, what do you mean that's always happened? He says, this has happened before multiple times. They always come and get me. Now, this was news for me. I went, hold on. He's used to this. He's not even upset. I'm upset. He's not upset.
No, he
And
thinks it's going to all clear up.
I clear out. And he leaves. He goes to jail. He gets booked and the whole process. And I'm going, okay, what happened? Now I realize I have a problem. I have to tell the church. I have to tell the authorities. And at this stage, the church is telling me that I really should have had him on a plane. I said, well, that's too late. He's actually in jail. By the time they called me back to tell me, I said, he's gone. He's in jail. John, that's a mistake. I said, no, it's a mistake. I said, your handbook says we have to, but John, we don't follow that. We have our own rules. Now, I'm hearing this from the church. They've got what the public understand. The Pope is calling for zero tolerance. This guy saying they always come and get me.
So let's just clarify, who was the Pope at the time?
Pope Francis.
Okay.
And I'm going, okay, it's just me. And did I fall asleep and wake up in a parallel universe because nobody seemed to be talking a language I could understand? And everything I said was, oh no, John, that's not how it goes. And I'd say, but the documentation would say this. And they were going, oh no, but that's just optics. And, and at this, Jeff, I was going, where did I fall in this? What's going on? And then I get this 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm still trying to process this. I'm not sleeping. And I get a call from Palm Beach jail, the booking office. They said, could we speak to Father Gallagher, please? I said, speaking, you have a call. I went, okay. I never had a call before from a jail.
It was him.
And he said, "Can you come now get me?" I said, "What are you talking about? Can you come get me?" I said, "For what? Just get me out of here. It's time I came home." I said, "Jose, I never want to see you again. And you can rot in there. I don't want you near me. Don't call me again." And I hung up. The bond office calls me again. "You're put down as the bond officer. Will you be paying the bond?" And I went, "I don't know who's smoking what here at the moment, but it's not me. I got that guy into jail. You can keep him. I don't want to see him." Okay. I hung up. This is 3 or 4 in the morning. Next morning, I had mass at 8 o'clock, and I had told all the staff to be there. It wasn't a negotiation. They were going to hear something, and they needed to be in the room. I announced it at church, and by this stage, I had full media circus outside. No one knew why they were there, only me. And I made the announcement. What had happened? I
Now
never
that
had
was against the church's direction, right? Or would you assume that was against the church's direction?
at that. I didn't have any directions because they weren't taking my calls at this point, and the diocese attorney hadn't replied to anything.
So you did it. If
I
you would
call,
have gotten direction, you think it would have been, don't do this, right?
if I
Or
had a got direction, I was told later I would have been the one in jail for covering it up.
oh, oh.
And the only reason I knew what to do was because they had the sheriff and state attorney's office directing me to keep the law. And that's all documented.
Yeah.
But they told me afterwards on multiple occasions that had I put them on a plane and covered that up, they were coming after me. I would have been in jail.
So you did the right thing. And is this person still in jail?
No, this person went to jail, um, got released. And I don't know the answer to this and how this happened. He was bonded out on $10,000 and someone paid that in cash. I don't know who paid that out, where that money came from. To my knowledge, when I met him, he knew no one in America. He bonded out, had a postponed sentence, then went to jail, was deported, and the last I knew, he was in Crone in Miami deportation center. After that, I could get no more information. Then the next time I heard from about him was when he was appointed to work in a parish and a school in India. So he's back in ministry, and I'm taken out.
So he is a, we would assume he is a priest now in India.
He's
We
still
would assume.
functioning as a priest in a parish with kids, approved by the Vatican.
And then and then there was something you just said really big. So I'm just going to ask the question because I don't have the answer. You said you're taken out. Have you been, I don't know what it's called. Have you been fired from the church as a priest?
Um, when we went as far as the U.S. Supreme Court, that's where everything went to a pregnant pause. Because what they actually won was, if you call it a win, they took everything under the First Amendment, that they had the freedom of speech and they had the freedom to operate and act outside of the state and any duration of the state, and that they would have the authority for any priest or any, and this applies to whether you're a Presbyterian, Episcopal, Evangelical, any church identity that claims First Amendment, that their pastor, in my case, priest, would have the right to sodomize and be transferred onto the protection of the church. That's what they got by taking me out. I petitioned the Vatican. Church law says within 90 days you get a reply. On the 90th day, we refiled. Nothing was ever said to me until about 4 years later in the appellate court in Miami. We got no answer, so they never even answered their own laws until the appellate for the diocese, in a combat throwaway comment to my attorney and to the judges of the district in Miami, turned around and said, "And John Gallagher will never work again in the Catholic Church." ever. We got his case tabled and filed, and it will never, ever be read.
And
I
that,
do know from other sources that Pope Francis did read my case, but he said he would never help me. That's where I'm at.
and you've brought another case to the Supreme Court. You do have another case pending, waiting to hear
That
if the Supreme Court will hear it.
Supreme Court will not hear it in this present
They
climate.
they said no.
They said no. By saying no, they created case law. It's my understanding. And under the case law, that means any pastor, regardless of denomination, if the church decides to invoke the First Amendment, he will be protected under the First Amendment, regardless if he commits sodomy, rape, or whatever the sexual dysfunction he does. He will be protected under the First Amendment, and they have the right to move him anywhere, protected by the church.
So when we last talked, you were waiting on hearing about the case. You've heard
That is
since
that
then.
is the result.
That's the result.
That's the
So you
result.
have your final result.
That's the result. That's as someone said to me, that's as good as it gets.
The,
Pedophiles and predators are more protected in the church than someone of my caliber. I'm not the first. I'm the first to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm not the first priest to speak out. I am not the first priest to do this. Others have done that. They have suffered dire consequences and paid an awful price.
and you've paid an awful price.
I paid an awful price, yes.
There's no doubt about it. There's no question that you've paid an awful price. But the fortunate thing is you have carried on with your life, but it's a terrible price you pay.
Well, no one realizes, what it's like because I was born and raised Catholic. I grew up in Northern Ireland, so Catholic is as much a religious identity, it's also a political identity. So that's what you identify with. Here in the States, I was everything Catholic. That's taken away. You're told you can't worship in our church, you can't come into our church, we don't want you, you can't don't set a foot here. So you lose that. I previously in the past been invited to parishioners of mine, people who I was friendly with. I was there for all the shades of events in their lives. And I've been invited to dinner. And times I've walked in, they've had me a drink. They said, sit down and have dinner. And before I put a thing on my plate, they'd say, John, just so we're clear, we love you very much. You're a great friend to us. We'll not be doing this again. We really can't support you or we don't want to be seen with you, but we'll still be friends. And Jeff, I have said, okay, understood. Thank you very much. I would push myself away from the table. I would stand up and say, thank you for your kind words. Thank you for your hospitality. If that's as good as it gets, I'll leave it here. And I have walked out. That passage in the Bible where it talks about in the New Testament, shake the dust off your feet. You have no idea how many times I shook the dust off my feet and walked away from people, places, and things.
I can honestly say I feel heartbroken that you have to suffer this plight because the I think in time it'll change. I really do in my heart. I believe in time it'll change, and you'll be one of the pioneers that changes it. But it's incredible to hear how far up the ladder it's gone to the point where it's actually gone to the Supreme Court, and you lost. I was hoping to hear from you today that the case is moving forward,
No,
and
it
and
hasn't
and
moved
it's
forward in
not.
10 years.
But it's done now. It's
It's done.
closed, right? Case closed. So that one,
There's nowhere else to go.
no, no,
And
not.
I don't trust them and they don't trust me. And, there's a lot of hurt. I mean, I left the Catholic Church in a cardiac ambulance. I'm in the hospital, and anyone who's Catholic would understand this. If a priest comes to visit, you usually get the sacrament of the sick, which is the last rites or whatever. I'm in cardiac care. My bishop comes in, it's Sunday, Pentecost Sunday. He argues with me and fights with me that this is not the case and is asked to leave and refuse the sacraments. And that's my last taste of anything
Of the
Catholic.
Catholic Church. It's not your
Whereas
last
the,
taste of you can still love Jesus, but you can't have the
I mean,
Catholic Church.
as a priest, we make a promise to say the divine office, which is the morning and evening prayer of the church. I started saying that in 1985. So I've been saying it for over 40 years. And I know many priests have never said it in years. I've never missed a day. Not very many priests can say that. And I've had a lot of dark nights.
John. We're friends for life,
We're
so
friends.
I don't know if that's any consolation, but
You
I'm
know,
I'm sorry.
mhm.
I'm really trying to get to the bottom of all this, and it's incredible to think of the corruption and the demented not approach, but it's in time it'll change. In time it will change. We have a new generation. It's funny. I was thinking the other day about how they were talking about what do they call them? Like social media,
Yeah,
pat uh, merc prophets maybe. I don't know that the
yeah.
Pope is endorsing all that now. So a younger generation, just like we talked about Pope Francis. I thought he was the one that was going to bring some change, and they said he really can't because it's the Cardinal College. It's the College of Cardinals that
Well,
outweigh his power.
well, here's the challenge that you're facing. This is in any organization, and for anyone who knows anything about organizational leadership. The challenge is secret, and I use the word the secret. If you have a secret on someone, you have to leverage that. And what happens typically is if you're a pedophile or a sexual proclivity, and you're doing that in the shadows in the dark of night, and someone else discovers that and they say, I'll not tell anyone. That starts to become currency. You have the Lavender Mafia, which is the largest lobby organization in the Vatican. You can Google all of this stuff. And because this is all undercover and in the darkness, as you get further up the chain and you're looking for promotions, it's always about what do we have in you? What are your ghosts? What are your closet? What's in your closet? And everything is about the currency. And it just becomes currency. Who has a secret on who? So you really can't expect the Cardinals to be clean.
No,
So it's always about the secret.
because that's how you climb the ladder.
That's how you climb the ladder.
That's not by being clean. It's
It's not
literally not by being clean. You
literally,
have
no,
to have the leverage.
it's not. It's all about leverage. And when
And
you look through that lens, it's all about leverage.
it's insane.
And that's the whole thing is how you can find dirt in someone. How can you dig up?
And
And
then
see
you've
what
got
people
them.
don't seemingly realize is that, if you're a heterosexual guy and you're having an affair, you'll do one or two things. You'll either end the relationship with a girl and leave, or you'll say, in due respect to the girl, I'm in love with her. I'm going to do it honorable. I will leave the priesthood and I will go and marry her. And they go. The gay and the pedophile will stay because their sexual drive and their sexual thrust is the abuse of power and the misuse of power. It's what power you can have in someone.
John, that's incredible that you put it in that perspective because it's. I I'm almost speechless, and I'm normally never been. I haven't been speechless much in my. I'm flabbergasted for certain. Not necessarily speechless, but um. Wow. Well, I believe we're at a good point because um I want to carry this conversation on again, but I
Yeah.
want to leave it at this point because this is a lot. This is a
This
lot.
is a this
I
is a
want
lot. This is a lot to digest, and it's a lot to
right, and I want to actually watch the interview before I say anything else because it's it I want to watch the entire interview before I say anything else, really, other than thank you because you've been incredible. And like I said, we're friends for life.
yeah.
You've got friends for life all over the place. You've just gotta not move on's the wrong word, but enjoy your new life. Just as and of course, don't ever forget your old life, but
No, I
enjoy
mean
your
it's
new
always
one.
it's lessons learned, and Jeff, I appreciate the opportunity because you knew nothing about me nor my story until we started to talk, and you really did take a leap of faith. You know, I remember when we had the first conversation, you wanted, let's go do this now. I went, hold on. I don't think that's a good idea. You need a little more homework here.
Yeah, yeah, I really did. I really did. I thought I really did. And I did my homework and I'm
I
still
know
flabbergasted. And I'm still, even thank God being the operative term here, I did my
yeah,
homework and it's a beautiful thing that we got to meet and it's a beautiful
it
thing that we got to be
is.
friends.
You know,
Yeah.
and as you said, there's, you know, for you, you got in this past, what, 10, 15, 20 minutes in the conversation, and it's hard to digest. I'm the center of my own story, and years on, it's still hard to digest. No matter how
40
many times
years.
I tell it, believe it, or whatever, it's still difficult. So it's pure compassion and pure gentleness. This is a good time to take the break, and we can pick it up again at another
Yes,
time.
sir.
Absolutely. And I
I'm
appreciate your
gonna do
time.
further homework. John Gallagher, thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you.
Thank
I'm
you.
looking forward to speaking more, not just on the podcast, when we run into each other, when we talk on the phone. I'm always looking forward to speaking more. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Jen. Take care.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Take care. Bye.